Welcome to the Harpe Bioherbicide podcast. I'm Dr. Alex Danis, and today's episode features a conversation with one of Harpe Bioherbicide's scientific advisors, Dr. Wesley Everman. Dr. Everman is an associate professor and extension weed specialist at North Carolina State University and works in corn, soybean, and small grains weed control. He regularly presents his work on weed biology, physiology, and control at regional, national, and international conferences. That makes him the perfect person to help us dive into today's topic. How exactly do you kill a weed? And how is science helping us make that process more effective and safer for everyone? We spoke to Wes at the Upper Coastal Plain Research Station in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. So thank you so much for chatting with me today. Can you introduce yourself? Tell me who you are and what you do.
Yeah, my name is Wesley Everman. I'm an extension weed specialist and associate professor at North Carolina State University. And in that role, I do teaching, extension, and research. And so in the extension role, probably the least familiar for folks is I'm essentially a free consultant for growers in the state. So if they have questions about how to manage their weeds, what's going on, they'll give me a call. I might come out to their farm, see what is going on, different weed issues, whether it's resistance, how to manage them, and give them the best recommendations, how to move forward. In research, I do the basic groundwork to identify the best management practices, vet new technologies, and then help find a way to roll them out and integrate them into the grower system. And to round it out, I do teaching, and I get to teach the youngsters, so I get the full circle from the students as well as their parents. So I interact with all of them and hopefully have a cohesive message going forward.
Yeah, I love that you're really sort of hitting this at all the different angles. You're talking to the growers, you're talking to their kids, you're really hitting this full circle. How did you get into this work? How did you sort of focus in on weed control?
Yeah, so this is an interesting story. I got to go back to my undergrad days. I was in agronomy, was doing all the different classes, and we'd have to grow plants and we'd have to look at stuff, and I just could never keep them alive right. And I started doing internships, and there was weed control, and I was killing plants, and I was like, gosh, I can kill a plant and get paid for it. So I was like, this might be the path for me. And, in the long run, it ended up being one of my bigger passions. So yeah, it definitely worked out, even though I couldn't quite grow the crops when I was younger.
I mean, controlling the weeds is an important part of growing the crops.
That's right.
So now you work with the farmers who do grow the crops. So why are you passionate about working with farmers?
That's a great question. Farming is really rooted in me. I grew up in a rural community. My grandfather was a farmer. Seeing what they went through, the challenges they faced. I grew up in the 80s, and a lot of struggles for farmers back then. And as I got older, I always wanted to farm, but wasn't in the cards. But this is the next best thing. I get to help find these solutions for these growers, vet these new technologies, and identify ways they can integrate them in their farm without a lot of challenges and struggles, and hopefully have a more successful operation.
When you're thinking about the challenges that those farmers are facing in weed control, what are the biggest ones that you're seeing farmers struggle with right now?
In my world, resistance and multiple resistance is the biggest thing. Overall, you could say rising input costs and, looking at trying to balance input prices with low commodity prices. So every decision they make on the farm around money is an important one. They don't have any extra money to waste. And when they're looking at weed management programs, they have to have a cost-effective as well as efficacious or effective herbicide to control those weeds and give them optimal yield potential.
And if you have an herbicide that does that they can afford, that they can apply and it's actually effective, if it actually does what they hope it does in their field, what does that mean for a farmer who's been struggling with this? What can that actually do for them and their family?
Yeah, it can give them some peace of mind, right? Because if they can take a herbicide, utilize it, control those weeds effectively, that's one less thing to worry about. They don't have to do follow-up sprays. They don't have to scramble and make short-term adjustments, right? And in the overall operation, that means they're going to have more time to worry about other challenges and focus on really where their focus needs to be on the overall operation. The more time they spend on small things, it takes away and it increases that time to management.
So thinking about Harpe as an herbicide, what made you want to get involved in this? What made you think like, hey, this actually might be a solution for these farmers that are struggling with this right now?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Harpe is a unique mode of action. It's a new way to kill the weeds, you could say. It is a herbicide, but it's not active the same way the others are. So it gives us a different way to manage them with a herbicide. It's a natural product. So it's not, not that synthetic compounds are bad, but it does derive from plants, which in the long term, in the big picture, is another source of income at the farm level, right? And it's seamless. It's not a new thing that farmers have to learn how to use. It doesn't involve getting new equipment. You don't have to add a bunch of stuff into a sprayer or onto the farm to make it work. So those three pieces really make it attractive, because when we get that weed control without having to make big changes, it's going to be adopted more quickly and more widely.
It's just easier to put into the workflow you've already got, the systems you've already got.
That's right.
You don't need to change your whole farm in order just to get this new herbicide in there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you've been running a lot of field trials of this product. Can you tell me a little bit about what that looks like? How do you set up a field trial of this? How do you say it's working, it's not working? What does that process look like?
Yeah, so when we set up field trials, we identify an area that has weeds we want to look at. Take a chunk of a field, let's say a farmer's got some weedy patches. We'll set up that trial. We'll do different treatments for comparisons and just go ahead and make those applications and go out and evaluate. See what happens when we spray either the product alone, different concentrations, maybe even different tank mixtures, and just get an idea what the injury looks like. Do we have chlorosis, which is a yellowing of the leaves? Do we get necrosis, which is death of the plant tissue and brown spots? And typically what we see with the Harpe is rapid activity. So it's going to work within a couple days. A lot of it depends on formulation. And when you have a product like this that's newer in its life, let's say there's a lot of formulation work going on to get that optimal end product. So they're not quite there yet. The product works, but you got to balance how you put it together and get it in the plant, and there's a lot that goes into that. But we're evaluating these different formulations and seeing how they work on the different weed species. So it's kind of exciting to see with each iteration what kind of differences we have.
As you're starting to run these field trials, what kind of responses or feedback are you getting from farmers?
Yeah, it's interesting as they see this product work. The early on formulations were very active, and we would see very rapid necrosis and plant death within hours if it was a really hot sunny day. So, farmers love seeing a dead weed. That it's one of their biggest challenges every year, and to see them light up when that plant is dying that quickly, it's kind of exciting. It's almost like watching a kid on Christmas morning. So, a lot of them express surprise, that how fast it works. Now we have to explain, well, the final version might not work this quick, but it gives them an idea of what might be happening, and they start thinking about how it might be fitting. And so in general, it's been a lot of excitement. You always, with farmers, if you know them, they're often a skeptical group of folks. So there's still questions, but they like what they've been seeing so far.
And where do you see the future of this going? If you can, envision 5 years down the road where this is sort of a commercialized product, it's out on the market, what kind of difference do you see that making for farmers?
I see down the road, when this gets commercialized, an opportunity for them to have another tool. This isn't just going to be something they try or it takes a lot of effort to get in, you're going to hopefully see a pretty seamless integration. So then they will also be able to preserve some of their other tools. The faster they can adopt this, the more pressure we take off of other weed management practices, whether they're other herbicides and concerns around resistance, or even our cultural and mechanical practices. The resistance isn't exclusive to herbicides, right? There are weeds out there that we don't kill well with tillage. There are weeds out there that adapt to cultural practices. So any tool we can add in that's a little bit different will help the farmers in the long run. So what we're hoping in the long term, each tool added will give longevity to weed management for the rest.
I think that's particularly interesting because you've mentioned that we're not just going to be relying on this one thing moving forward, but it's going to be sort of preserving these other methods. And you've talked a little bit about sort of cultural methods and tillage and mechanical things and things like that. Can you talk a little bit more, and maybe even a little bit more broadly, about how important it is to preserve all these different kinds of farming methods, maybe beyond weed management, for the future? Why do we want this diversity? Why do we want so many tools in the toolbox rather than just picking one thing and saying that's it forever?
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing, we did already do that. We picked the one thing and said we'll use this forever. And we had what I always call the easy button with Roundup and Roundup Ready crops. Roundup was safe to the crops, had a really favorable environmental profile. There's a lot of positives and widely adopted. And all the other practices kind of went by the wayside. We didn't integrate in different herbicides. We stopped using a lot of our cultural practices. And in many cases, for the betterment of the environment, Roundup Ready technology shepherded in a lot of no-till, right? So we took away tillage as an option because it was so effective. Now, a lot of areas needed to go away from tillage, so there's positives that drove that. But as we see that overuse of a single method, Mother Nature finds a way, right? And this is the exact same case we saw with the Roundup and the glyphosate resistance. If you look back through the centuries, whether it was hand weeding or tillage, we would see shifts and adaptations to those methods because that used to be all there was, right? Hand weeding, and then we had widespread tillage and we saw a shift there. So we hopefully are learning from the past, and we're looking at it and saying, okay, we need to be more focused on these integrated practices, and we're trying to encourage the growers to. The big challenge with that is it's not always easy, and there's a lot of farmers growing a lot of acres. There's a lot of small farmers that have jobs outside of the farm. Efficiency is key, and when we can't integrate things in an efficient manner or control our weeds efficiently, a lot of the integrated practices go by the wayside. So that's going to be the big challenge facing integrated weed management in the future. The more seamless tools we bring to the toolbox, the better off we'll be.
Final question. Mm-hmm. When you sort of look towards the future of agriculture, what is the most hopeful future that you see? What do you want for farmers? What do you want for this industry? What is the thing that you think could make the biggest difference?
Ooh, I'd love to just say high commodity prices because that make their life the easiest.
Yeah,
and it'd probably make our lives as researchers the easiest because they'd have enough money to implement whatever practice. But honestly, what boils down to is farmers having some peace of mind and not a lot of stress around day-to-day decisions. Like I said, the biggest challenge and focus should be on maintaining yield potential, focus on growing, the best yield on the acre they can. And there's a lot of little decisions that go into that, but some of them have become bigger decisions than they used to be or need to be. And weed management is one of those. If we can make some of these decisions less stressful, smaller, take less bandwidth, I guess would be the best way to say it. That would give growers that opportunity to focus on some of these bigger questions, on managing their farm more efficiently, producing more, and being more sustainable in the long run.
I think that's a pretty great goal then. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.
That wraps up this episode of the Harpe Bioherbicide podcast. Special thanks go out to Dr. Wesley Everman and, of course, to our listeners. For more information on today's topic and Harpe Bioherbicide's mission to provide a new environmentally safe and sustainable approach to weed control, visit harpebio.com. I'm Dr. Alex Danis, and we'll see you next time.